As we all walk along the path of life, there are those that stand up and stand out. Reverend Dr. Lauren Artress is one of those. Today, after a lifetime of work with the Labyrinth around the world, Lauren is known as the grandmother of the modern-day Labyrinth movement and is the founder of Veriditas. In 2006, she was designated honorary canon at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco for her work with the Labyrinth. She is the author of several Labyrinth books, including Walking a Sacred Path, The Sand Labyrinth Kit, The Sacred Path Companion, and most recently, the book we'll hear most about tonight, The Path of the Holy Fool, How the Labyrinth Ignites Our Visionary Powers. Reverend Dr. Lauren Artress, thank you for all you have done for the world. We're so delighted to have you here with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here tonight. It's wonderful. And the idea of the Speakers Bureau coming from Trinity Cathedral is really unique. You're one of the few, if perhaps the only group that's doing a Speakers Bureau. So it's a delight to be here, and it's a delight to talk with you all, even as we're on Zoom. I'm delighted that we are able to get together this way. So my talk kind of has two titles tonight. One is The Path of the Holy Fool, the Imagination and the Labyrinth, which Trinity Cathedral named, and also just the title of my book, the subtitle, The Path of the Holy Fool, How the Labyrinth Ignites Our Visionary Powers. And so clearly, there's a connection here with imagination and labyrinths. And I want to share just in the beginning here that for me, I feel like the Labyrinth and walking the Labyrinth this many years, because we opened it at Grace Cathedral in 1991 in canvas form. It really has tamed my chaotic imagination. I was a fairly ungrounded kid, and if you read The Path of the Holy Fool, you'll have more story with that. And really that what it has done is it helped me become embodied, and also then had my imagination finally fall in sync with the rhythms of my heart, literally, and the thoughts of my mind. So tonight, I want to talk about the Path of the Holy Fool, because I think the fact that we're all in some way connected to labyrinths, we all have a bit of holy fool in us for sure. And how we live that out in the world is a very important trait, especially at this time of our history and this time of turbulence, especially in the United States, really the world. And how do we navigate all of that? So let me say a little bit about how the Grail stories and the Grail legends came into my life. It actually was through Labyrinth Society. In 2005, Liz Warren, a storyteller, came to the gathering, their annual conference, and shared the story of the Grail legend, and specifically Parsifal. Now understand the Grail legends, gosh, it's a huge body of work. There's actually three major parts to that. Parsifal's one, Sir Galahad's another, Lancelot's another. We've heard all of these names, but Parsifal is really more of the holy full element of it. And it's about a journey from his self-absorption to consciousness. His self-absorption to consciousness. And so I find that really important, and that was really kind of part of what caught my attention. And then, you know, it was fun to hear the story and all of that. And then years later, through Jean Houston's network, the Dramanon, a wonderful friend, Betty Rothenberger, mailed me a book called The Speech of the Grail. And it was like, whoa, the Speech of the Grail. And what was happening in my life at that time, because I had been working with the Labyrinth, and I imagine some of you have found this too, my speech was opening up. as you become embodied, as you become grounded, my speech began to open up. So I was communicating in metaphors and it was flowing through my mind. And there it was, I didn't have to work at it anymore. It just was. And that words became friends of mine, and metaphors began to resound in my mind. So I will share the background a bit, but let me say a little bit more that I actually identified with Parsifal. And early on, I thought this was some crummy old, maybe it's because of Monty Python and all the other movies about this. I sort of thought this is, some story about some dumb boy that finally finds manhood, And then I realized, no, I actually heard the quote from Maria von Franz, a very well-known Jungian, right? Had her analysis with Jung himself. And she called it an eternal fairy tale. An eternal fairy tale. I love that. And I didn't know what it meant, but you can kind of guess, right? It resounds. It has a resilience to it. Why? Because the metaphors speak to us. The metaphors speak to us. So let me just give a little bit of background and also kind of say where we're going tonight. What I'd like to do is talk not about the whole story, because it's quite involved and there's lots of characters and all sorts of things, but I'm going to take 4 what I would call turning points in the story. And the turning points, I hope, speak directly to some turning points in your life. Because that's what good eternal fairy tales do, that they bring us into our own awareness. And then after, we'll talk about at least 3 of those, and I'll show a bit of the PowerPoint, because the first one, the spiritual opening, is related directly to the imagination. And then toward the end of our time together, we'll do a brief, about 5-minute writing exercise after a time of doing a handheld labyrinth meditation. And then we'll have a dyads for you to kind of share or discuss what we're talking about, and we'll come back into a discussion, large group discussion at the end. So these stories, and there's many of them, as I mentioned, and different branches of them all and everything, they were actually probably had their early roots in Celtic tradition. And they were gathered oral stories, and then they began to be written down, first in France by Christian de Troyes, who began to gather these stories, write them down, and unfortunately died before the project was completed. At a few years later, not long, around 1208, Wolfram Aschenbach also gathered these stories and successfully accomplished compiling them all, at least the ones he knew. And then they became called the Grail legends. Now, interesting in terms of the background is that these stories were being gathered at the very time that the Roman Catholic Church was gaining in its power, because it was able to organize and structure themselves and get their, quote, infrastructure all settled, so to speak. And so here they are, the Roman Church offering the one metaphor of you have to climb the ladder of perfection. And I would imagine some of you here, I have not, I was not necessarily too touched by the church, but I imagine some of you here have had that, be perfect, better and better every day, the more perfect ladder of perfection, of course, Jacob's ladder. And so interesting that it feels to me like there's a counterbalance here in the culture in Europe, in that here, this is when the Grail stories became, famous, literally. They were famous not in the church, but outside the church. They were read along the pilgrimage routes and told and shared. They were also shared in the royal courts of France. So something's going on here. One thing, and the major thing, is that the Grail stories offer an entirely different metaphor for the spiritual journey. It's not about climbing the ladder to perfection. It's about the journey. It's about the trip. It's about being on the road. It's about meeting people. It's about sharing your lives. It's about making mistakes. And because that's what it takes to come to consciousness. Rather than being inculcated in a belief process, it's a discovery process. It's an unfolding process. And exactly at this same time, that's when the labyrinths were put in the great European cathedrals. I don't think there's a coincidence here. The labyrinth really supports the metaphor of the journey, the unfolding, the path, the way. And so, as we know, 23 of the great cathedrals in the Middle Ages had labyrinths. And now the most famous one remaining in its original form, of course, is Chartres Cathedral. So at this time as well, knighthood, see, and again, we'll be talking more and more about metaphor, but knighthood with the chivalrous and all that was going on, chivalry, is also, or could be understood as a metaphor, not against, but counterbalancing the Roman Church again. You know, the Roman Church, you're supposed to be saving souls. And you're in service to this, you know, saving your soul by climbing the ladder of perfection. Well, in knighthood, they're in service to the people. They're not saving souls. They're in service to the people. In fact, when there's a big battle and the knights are fighting, it was a failure to kill someone, important, failure to kill someone. And if you were there and you had won the tussle, the question was, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to learn? And the person says, yes, yes, I'm willing to learn. And then is freed, but has taken on the assignment that they have to learn. So I don't think there's a coincidence to this, that between 1170 and 1230 are when the labyrinths went into the great cathedrals. There's other ones later too. I'm not saying it's, you know, a line drawn in the sand, but this is when the bulk of them were put in. And again, such a metaphor about the journey. So Joseph Campbell sums it up like this, the whole Grail legend. And he was very connected to the Grail legend with the Parsifal part of it. He says, there's no fixed law, no established knowledge of God set up by prophets or by priests that can stand against the revelation of a life lived with integrity in the spirit of its own brave truth. In the spirit of its own brave truth. And again, these stories are coming out right around the time when the church is convincing peasant and king alike that they had to save their souls. So that balance, I think, is really not lost in these stories. It offers a whole another metaphor. So I'm going to give you just a brief overview, and then we'll talk about the 4 turning points. And the overview goes right into the first one, which is the turning point of the spiritual opening. So first of all, I mentioned Parsifal's journey is from self-absorption to consciousness. And it's by meeting people along the path. How's that for a metaphor for the labyrinth, right? Meeting people on the path. And also, I want to say that the legend is lighthearted. And the book, The Speech of the Grail, Linda Sussman's book, understands it that way too. It's actually a poem, a very long poem with stanzas that rhyme and all of that. And it's lighthearted, though. It's not meant to be like Wagner's really dark, huge, booming instruments that kind of signal doom and tragedy. It's lighthearted, and there's lots of metaphors and whole different ways of being able to understand life through understanding that, hey, this is not some huge drama. So I want to read just the first paragraph from Liz Warren. And just because it gives you, sets the stage a little bit. Here it is. It was the season when trees flower, when shrubs leaf out, meadows go green, and birds, each in their own tongue, sing sweetly in the morning, and all is a flame of joy. It was also the season of King Arthur, that glorious chivalric time when many people believed that humanity was at its best and most burdened. But in the midst of all that beauty, there was a terrible wasteland, and in that wasteland, a waste forest. And on the edge of that waste forest was a farm. And the farm was owned by a widow woman who lived with her son, with her servants and farmers. Now that sets the whole scene. That sets the whole scene. Well, understand, as in all eternal fairy tales, folks, of course, the mother was a queen, and the king, her husband, and two sons, Parsifal's two brothers, were killed in battle. So war is a theme here. War is a theme here. And you could understand then that this family was if we translated it into today's time, a gold star family. They had lost deeply from battle. And so the isolation is because this traumatized mother who's lost two sons and a husband to battle took her last dear, dear son off to hide and be in isolation in the middle of a forest. And Parsifal doesn't know a thing about this. He doesn't know a thing about it at all. And he loves the countryside, and he's out riding his horse and being there and being present, doesn't know a thing about it. And so this is the first part, spiritual opening. So Parsifal's out in the beautiful countryside. He's hunting. He's a great hunter. He's probably about 15, 16. He's very skilled as a hunter, very skilled. And he's hunting, and then he starts hearing kind of a thunderous thing happening. What is it? Hooves, horses galloping through the bush, and they break through, and he sees them for the first time. Now, don't forget, he doesn't know anything. And he thinks, oh my heavens, the sun is glistening off their armor. And he's really taken aback, like, what is this? And at first he thinks, oh, it must be the devil. And then he says, no, it's too beautiful. Oh, the beauty of it, the beauty of it. So they pull up, they stop their horses. They're on an errand. There's a damsel in distress. And so they're asking him, have you seen anybody come this way? Have you seen anybody here? Did anybody ride through here? And Parsifal's totally struck, just totally overwhelmed. He can't put two words together. And who are you? Are you angels? You know, he's really, really, really been away from people, only his mother. In fact, folks, Parsifal didn't even know his name in the beginning. He thought his name was Dear Son or My Beloved One. So they ask his name and he doesn't know. Beloved son, I guess. He doesn't know. So they ride off. I mean, they're like, oh my God, this guy is really, something's, really off on this. And they ride off, and Parsifal, because he's asked them, well, what are you? And they said, we're knights. We're knights of King Arthur's Round Table. Well, what's King Arthur's Round Table? And this question answer goes on. And when they depart, he decides he's really clear. His mind is aflame. He's clear that he's going to go off and become a knight of King Arthur's Round Table. Now, let's take a moment to talk about spiritual opening, because they occur in all different forms. They happen synchronistically. They can come in any form. It can also come in the form of trauma. And the one common factor of spiritual opening is the imagination. that somehow the imagination, our human imaginations, get galvanized in some way. Now, I'm hoping that you're having kind of, oh yeah, a memory kind of, does that speak to people? Is that, yeah, speaking to people? Yeah. That's what runs through it all. And that's really what led me into kind of exploring more about the what does it mean? What is the imagination? How does it function? And how is it connected to the divine imagination, which I think the Labyrinth puts us in touch with. If we're open to it, if we're in the flow, if we're willing to meet the moment instead of deny the moment. I mean, this is scary stuff, folks. This can be scary stuff. So I want to take a moment here to show and talk about the imagination in more depth. I love the quote from Anthony de Mello. Enlightenment may take a lifetime, but seeing happens in a flash. Enlightenment may take a lifetime, but seeing happens in a flash. And that's really what is, again, from the imagination. So let me take a moment here, and you all know by now that this takes a moment to set up here. Good. So let me pull you over here. Good. This is a kind of a key question. And on the right, you see the classical understanding and kind of the muse of imagination. And she has a heart. She has the ability of music. And I love this. Typewriter on fire. Because in a way, that's where I think that's a creative mind. And here's the question: how do you, listening to this evening, imagine your imagination? Take a moment just to see what comes immediately to mind. Immediately, how do you imagine your imagination? So it's time for our society to get going on an intentional, dedicated, and systemic effort to up our imagination quotient, the real IQ at work, at home, in play, at school, and in our community life. We really undervalue imagination. Oh, it's just your imagination. Oh, you're just seeing things, or, but the imagination is very, very tender and not necessarily reliable until we are able to embody it. And that's what the Labyrinth does. So I want to talk about the different functions of imagination. And Lars, this is thanks to you. I know you're on this call. Thanks to you, this is really Lars's work, taking my work, my first version of this that I've used for quite a while, and then put this into this form. Replicating and repetition, that is one of the things that happens with the imagination. And so that's one of the forms, that's one of the functions. Organizing and archiving experiences is another function. I often feel like my imagination is like, you remember the old cartoon with Carol Burnett where she's the cleaning woman going into someone's office, the night offices, and she's there cleaning away and organizing, archiving, all of that organizing. And then it's organized, so that's why we have images and dreams. Now, birthing images, these are kind of stacked on one another. They become a little more sophisticated. And birthing images, what occurs in the imagination is not unreal. It is yet unrealized. And one of our facilitators, Nicole Jones, was quoting this James Baldwin quote. So birthing images, we kind of know that. We're okay with that. We, feel like, okay, the artist can birth images, where we're not. And this is a lovely quote from Rilke: you must give birth to your images, their future, your future waiting to be born. Fear not the strangeness you feel, the future must enter you long before it happens. And that is so true. And I'm hoping that many of you have had this experience of, there's something out there, and then slowly you begin to understand what it is as the future enters you long before it happens. So I want to bring in this wonderful photo here. It's actually a painting by Mauricio Martinez. And he just connected with the Chart Labyrinth, just saw it. He didn't walk it, he saw it. And he set him off, just painting, 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 painting. He's a serious oil painter from Argentina. And this is only one of probably, I don't know, 200, 250 paintings. He always has, often has the theme of the labyrinth as a bridge, and you can see it there as the bridge. And so this birthing images, he's also capturing the image of the labyrinth. Now, receiving images is a little bit trickier. A lot of human beings, J.K. Rowling's and Harry Potter called them muggles. You start receiving images and you're in trouble. It's like, Lily Tomlin saying, you pray to God, you're religious, but if you speak to God, you're religious. If God speaks to you, you're schizophrenic. And there's a fear of receiving images. And yet, how many of us have received images on the labyrinth? I certainly have. I want to share a little bit about Elizabeth Gilbert and give you this as a resource. There's a wonderful TED Talk on creativity by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she describes this wonderful poet, Ruth Stone. Ruth Stone's out there hanging up her laundry outside. She's a Southern deceased now, but poet. And she would get this feeling like, uh-oh, it's like a train kind of running through a small town station. This poem is going to come through her mind. And she runs in the house and gets a pencil and tries to capture the poem, and often succeeded, sometimes not, but the poem would rush through her. And the feeling like it'll rush through her, and if she's not ready, it's going to go find someone else. This idea of receiving images is very powerful. And Elizabeth Gilbert's talk on that, on TED Talk, is wonderful. And then the labyrinth, the imagination becomes a reflective mirror. And, we begin to use it for self-reflection. When we're thinking about, did I handle that well? Gosh, I sort of, spoke up too soon. I didn't really listen well. You see, the imagination is often feeding us images about what we didn't do or what we need to reflect on. So the reflective mirror. Now, this is actually in Grace Cathedral, and this is the light show. It's called Grace Light, and picturing the divine imagination. I really love this image because it really does capture that there's something happening here. And I think I have this photo next. No, well, here, yes, the divine imagination. This is artist Kit Kennedy's sense of the divine imagination. When our human imaginations are functioning and connected, we receive images. And that's referred to, it's a theological term, the divine imagination. It's just people don't use it much because we don't understand it. And the labyrinth is really what's helping us understand this ground, certainly for me. And then there's this wonderful quote from Ansel Adams: in the presence of extraordinary reality. Now, extraordinary reality to me is, when Parsifal saw the galloping horses burst through the bush, he had no way of understanding it, but his imagination grasped it. And that's extraordinary reality. In the presence of extraordinary reality, consciousness takes the place of imagination. So there's a kind of a passing gear in imagination into something bigger, something connected. And that's how he concluded, I'm going off to be knighted by King Arthur. Now, there's a challenge here because we don't have words for the invisible world. And the imagination lives in the invisible world. This is where the Grail Castle comes in, and that'll be our final of the four areas. So we don't have words for the invisible world, but what we do have is metaphor. And metaphor serves as a bridge. This is a wonderful labyrinth that John Ritter did on the Wabash River in Lafayette, Indiana. Isn't that lovely? Metaphor is the bridge. And Marion Woodman, this is a quote from her, that metaphor, think about this for a moment. Metaphor yokes matter and spirit together without bloodshed. Without bloodshed. Now, this is important. Why? Because our experiences in the labyrinth speak to us in metaphor. It yokes matter and spirit together without bloodshed. One easy one was, is like, she's a peach. You get it, right? You get what that means. So let's try some harder ones. Here's Emily Dickinson. Narcotics cannot still the tooth that nibbles at the soul. Do you get the spirit matter? Can you see it and understand it? It goes right into our bones, right into our flesh. Here's another. And the day came when the wrist to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the wrist it took to open. You see, it doesn't have a lot of connection to the grounding. It connects in our imagination. Spirit and matter are melded. So the invisible realms can be found in Grace Cathedral. And well, Grace Cathedral, that's true. Grail Castle, any cathedral, any place, folks, where the veil is thin. I love the Celtic term on that, where the veil is thin. And that's why Parsifal's journey into the Grail Castle, seeking the Grail, that's where we'll continue our journey right now. So there's a fair amount of content in that understanding, but I also want you to reflect on, when was your imagination galvanized, opened? And it can happen with just seeing a single flower, for sure. Now let me go on to the second item, and that is that in the whole sense of, and most people know this even without knowing the story, that Parsifal finds the Grail Castle. Oh my heavens, this liminal world, this world where some kind of life-giving something is supposed to happen, and he doesn't quite understand that. But along his journey, he learns, he is knighted. He goes and gets knighted. He goes and finds a teacher that teaches him not, because he killed somebody with his hunting instrument. And it was a humiliation, a terrible thing to do. And so he finds a mentor that teaches him skills with not hunting instruments, but battle instruments. And that's a big deal. And so that's part of the story that I'm not including, except this teacher, he's sending him off, and this teacher says, now, one more thing I want to tell you, don't ask questions. Knights have the answers, folks. They don't ask questions. They tell people. They're supposed to know everything. And so that is the one thing. There were a couple others, but anyway, that's the one main thing that led Parsifal. Here he is. He's searching for the Grail Castle. He leaves his teacher behind, and there were helpful things too. And so here he is. One day he's on his horse and searching, and he falls asleep. And his horse kind of wakes him up by a frightened neigh, and really realizes, oh my heavens, he's on a very narrow path, a very sharp cliff to his right. And about 30 feet below, maybe even more, there's a lake below, and there's no place to go. None. And he finds somehow he clicks ahead, and because he meets down in the lake, there's this guy in a boat. He's really well dressed, but he's a guy in the boat, and he tells him, just follow the path. There's no path. Just follow the path, and the path appears beneath his feet. We'll come back to that. Here he winds up at the Grail Castle, And where am I going? Where am I going? And the guy says in the boat, I'll meet you at the bridge. I'll meet you at the bridge. You're going to have dinner with me tonight. And they're all excited. They're all excited about this. And he says, what castle? And then it appears. It appears. So now he knows where he's going. The path appears beneath his feet. He's going in. He goes in. They take his horse. He gives him a wonderful gown for the evening, whole banquet. And as he sits there, and then people come in and they're so delighted to see him. It's like they've been waiting for him for an age, a long, long time. And they're just thrilled. And then there's a procession with food, but just before that, they bring out the same man that was in the boat, out and sit a stretcher down at Parsifal's feet. This guy is on a stretcher. Wait a minute. And this is the wounded Fisher King. Now, Parsifal was really curious. Oh my God, who is this guy? And what's wrong with him? And why is he was okay in the boat? And he says, well, you know what? I won't ask him. I'm not supposed to ask questions. Don't ask questions. So he doesn't ask the question. The speech of the Grail, remember? No, he doesn't do it. And then, so the evening kind of loses all its energy, and he goes off to bed, and he wakes up in an empty castle. Empty castle. He finally gets on his horse with his armor and gets across the bridge just in time, and the castle disappears. So I want to ask you, what bad advice have you gotten in your life? And capture the first thing that comes to mind, by the way. Just let it, grab it. Don't go, oh, no, that's not a good example. Now, capture the first thing that comes into your mind. And what was the bad advice? What was the bad advice? Important question, isn't it? So the sense that this Grail legend really covers a lot of our experience and helps us put our experience in context. Let me fast forward in the story. Parsifal meets people all along the way. You find that he's related to everyone in the story. And isn't that so true? We're all connected. We're all related somehow. And he's really struggling. He knows, because someone told him, his cousin, that he failed in the castle. He failed. He didn't ask the question. And she was so irate with him. You were there? You were there and you didn't ask the question? Good heavens. And so he's really has a lot of remorse. The good news about Parsifal is that he is pure-hearted. And that's not a term we often use, but he wasn't defensive. He was truly open to learning. And that's a pretty good thing to be. And so he kind of could, we kind of joke now, he was coachable. He was coachable, and so he's learning along the way. But here he is searching once again for the Grail Castle. Now he knows what it is. He doesn't quite know what he's supposed to do, but that in it is a healing element called the Grail. And the Grail, Linda Sussman defines as it meets you, think about this with the Labyrinth, it meets you where you are, it gives you what you need, and it forms an invisible web of relationship between individual destiny and service to the planet. Forms a web of relationship between individual destiny and service to the planet. And those of us introducing the Labyrinth to people, it's no small thing, because we're helping people come to consciousness. So he's looking and hoping that he finds the castle again, but oh boy, he's really down and out. And I'm leaving, folks, I'm leaving a lot of the story out just to cover these 4 turning points. But he's just 5 years, 5 years of searching. And he's angry at God. He knows who God is by now. He's angry at God and he's down and out and he's just miserable, just miserable. He's kicking himself, remorse, remorse, remorse. Anybody in that place, you need to get out of it. Here he is on this road, angry, miserable, miserable. And here he sees some pilgrims coming toward him. Wow, okay. And he says, he asks for help. Do you know any place to stay? Do you know any place? And they say, well, yeah, down the road, there's a forest hermit. Now, later on, when the stories were Christianized by Robert Bourne, he's saying it's Good Friday, you know, then these pilgrims are on their way to a cathedral, I guess, for holy services. And no, there's a forest hermit down the road, and he follows their directions and finds the forest hermit. And this is the 3rd turning point for him. And you know, this guy, he kind of lives out in the wilderness and kind of a shack kind of thing. And now Parsifal made an agreement with himself that he was not going to spend any longer than 2 nights in one place until he found the Grail Castle again. And you know, there's an important element in here, that when we feel we failed, when we've done something poorly, when we've done something wrong, we sometimes make a vow to ourselves, a vow. And I like to mention this each time I tell this, because that's an unconscious, often it's unconscious in us. We make a vow. And so I want, if there's a vow there that you've made somewhere, take a moment to name it, because it can be very helpful and it can be very destructive. And his vow, I'm not going to stay in any place more than 2 days, 2 nights before I have to move on again. Well, the forest hermit was an older man. He was an excellent listener. He really was and is a spiritual director to our poor, ailing, lonely, desperate Parsifal. And he hears him out. And Parsifal tells the whole story, and there's much more to tell than I'm telling you tonight. And he stays 15 days. 15 days. And he's heard and he's responded to with compassion. He's responded to with kindness. And it gives him a chance to really kind of see his life in perspective. And that's what really good spiritual direction, good therapy helps us get. You know, life is hard, life is complex, life is challenging. And to be able to get it, grasp where we are in it is so important. And this is what the forest hermit does. The forest hermit explains about the wounded fisher king. It's a battle wound. It's a male wound in his groin. It's disempowered him from leadership. And we know how good leadership feels, and we know how bad leadership feels. And he understands that, what happened and why the man was on a stretcher. He also learns that the wounded Grail king is this man's brother. Oh, he also realizes that their father's son, and so this guy is his uncle, Parsifal's uncle. See, you see to me that connection that really comes through there. And so he leaves, and that this really then kind of begins the final story, final point that I want to bring to our attention, and that is the success. So the sense that the meeting the forest hermit gets his feet on the ground enough that he realizes he has to, and he's supposed to ask a question. Now, not just any question, you know, and here it's against the advice of his early teacher, right? Ask a question. What do you mean ask a question? Now, asking a question is really important. And of course, we do have that practice of asking a question in the labyrinth, right? You can take a question in, and often I would describe it as a question that you're carrying in your heart. And a question, a good question is really important. It's really important to have a question that goes to the point of things. For instance, you know, there's that wonderful crazy Pink Panther, you know, series of the past, and the detective Groucho, whatever his name was, walks up to the receptionist desk at a hotel, and he's going to check in. And so he's there, and he's, you know, filling out the forms, and he looks down the hallway here is a dog coming at him. And he turns to the receptionist and says, "Does your dog bite?" And the receptionist says, "No." And the dog comes up and bites him really hard on the hand. And he goes, "Wow, I thought you said your dog doesn't bite." And he says, "Well, that's not my dog." You see, that wasn't the question. The question should have been, "Is this your dog?" You see? And so questions can really miss the point. I remember one person going into the center of the labyrinth with a question, and her question was, "How long should I stay in the labyrinth?" Is that helpful? It's actually a body question, folks. Your body tells you when you're ready to leave the center of the labyrinth. So it's a valid question, but it's not a question up here, you see. So Parsifal leaves the forest hermit, and there he goes. He goes toward finding the Grail castle. So I want to stop here for a moment and see if there's any questions. We've covered, you know, 3 of the 4 turning points. So the sense of the spiritual opening with the imagination being shown so clearly. And it raises a question about your relationship with your imagination. It's just like our dreams. If we nurture our inner world, it responds. If we trash our inner world, you get trash back. You see, and so that relationship is really, really very important. And then the second question about bad advice. I mean, what advice have you had, and how does that work in your life now? And so that's an important question. Also, the third one, in terms of meeting the forest hermit. When have you received kindness? When have you been felt fully understood? And so I would like to go toward a finger meditation tool, meditation. We're also now calling them, as you know, handheld labyrinths. And then we would go into writing. So I'd like to, let me take a moment. Do you have finger meditation tools handy nearby? Okay. Why don't we take a stretch break right now? If you need to get a labyrinth or something like that before we move into our meditation, let's indeed take a stretch break. You might also want to get something, writing and maybe your journal as well. So just take a stretch break. I'm going to take a sip of water here. And as we come back together, perhaps there's some questions before this, just to see if any of the material is that it's clear, or there's questions to take it deeper. We do have the time for that, so it's fine to do.
If there's a question, if you could raise your hand down in the reactions place on your screen, there's a way to raise your hand. It's going to be much easier to see electronically. Thank you.
Any thoughts, any clarifications, any? Okay, seems like we're good to go, huh? All right. Okay, so take I'm going to use this labyrinth tonight, the chart style. Yeah, feel free to share yours. This is, Veriditas is doing the Friday handheld labyrinth meditations, and it's always fun to kind of hold up and see what people are working with and all. And if you have a small labyrinth, then you might have the time to walk it a couple times. Because we are doing well on time, I'm going to play about 10 minutes of music. And if you want to begin writing, I'm also going to show you right now. I'll share my screen with, let's see, with this. So this would be the sense of moving from the meditation. And when the music ends, I would encourage you, and I may even speak and add a line to remind you, kind of to nudge you on. But in your writing exercise, what bad advice have you had in your life? Now, that's a tricky question. And if you find yourself spending all your time on that question, maybe you need to reflect on that. But also, I see the first question and the second question sort of connected. Write about moments in your life where guidance and kindness, when you had guidance and kindness given. I think kindness is equal to guidance in a way. Perhaps it's a different form of guidance. And then another question you might want to do, and I don't think you're covering all three of these questions. Maybe you are, I don't know. I just wanted to give you a broad way to think about this here. What questions do you carry in your heart at this moment? Because you'll see toward the end, when we talk about the Grail Castle as the fourth turning point, it's about having the speech of the Grail, about having a question that's not asked from your head, it's asked from your heart. And so my hope is that the labyrinth walk that we do now, finger walk, obviously, you're able to reflect on some of these questions. And if not, as you know, that's fine too. It truly is fine too. Now, let's see. I want to start the music. I think I can also have this still stay on screen, but we shall see in a moment here. I'm going to have to stop sharing in order to share, so just a moment. So I see a hand up. Is your hand up?
I have a question.
Good.
Bad advice, you mean the sort of stuff that people tell you to do all the time that you have no intention of doing, or bad advice that you've done and that you just chalk up to, well, it's the past, I can't undo it? I don't understand at all.
Okay, well, it's a great question. I think if you have all that bad advice coming your way and you don't pay attention to it, doesn't matter then. But if it's bad advice that you actually followed and found out that, oh man, that was really not good advice, or I applied that advice wrong in my life, that might be something to reflect on. Okay.
Everything is my own idea.
What?
I just never take it as anybody else's idea but my own. I don't take anything as anybody telling me what to do. It's always what I feel that I do.
All right, then maybe you haven't had any bad advice, or maybe you've given yourself some bad advice.
Yes.
There you go. That's what you might want to write about.
Okay.
And don't forget, there's the kindness, I think, is important to draw us toward, the positive things in the world. And right now, we are really lacking kindness. So to remember an experience of kindness, I think, can be a very powerful thing as well. So, okay, so I'm going to, in a moment, start music, and that takes a moment anyway. But let me light this candle for us, and let us bring our light into the world, symbolically, metaphorically, by lighting this candle. So as we begin our labyrinth walk and meditation, I'll put this here for that light to glow and grow. And take a moment to have your labyrinth right in front of you, and perhaps by this time, where we've been doing finger meditation walks for such a long time now, almost 2 years, you might have a method that you use to warm your labyrinth, to kind of wake it up, to kind of greet it. What I do is I take my right hand and move clockwise around the outer edge, well, really the whole labyrinth, and just let myself begin to focus in on the path. I connect with my breath, and Sandra's meditation was very helpful about that. And you feel free to do that. A sigh is wonderful. You'll be mute yourself, so you don't have to worry about, oh my God, will anybody hear me? And just let yourself come home to yourself. And you might choose one thing to reflect on, or this might be just an open walk for you. So I'll begin the music. great. I'm putting up the writing, and my hope is that you're probably writing by now as the music ended. And so the 3 questions are here. And this will be in silence. You have about 5 minutes to reflect on these questions. And I'll come back in just a few minutes. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to our large group here.
This was so delightful, and I really appreciate this time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for being here. And you know how to connect with one another is you the 3 dots, like in Irene's corner, there are 3 dots, and you can chat, email her directly and get each other's emails if you want to continue the conversation. That's important.
I just sent you guys a direct chat, a direct note.
Okay, good, Eileen, good. So, so let me say a little more, because we have one more turning point, and that is finally that Parsifal is successful with the Grail, finding the Grail castle, finding the Grail in the Grail castle. Now, there's all sorts of adventures, folks, I'm leaving out, all sorts of ones, but big brushstrokes. I think there's a very strong comparison between the Grail Castle and not only the lovely cathedrals that a lot of labyrinths are in, but also the labyrinth itself. And that in the Grail Castle, it's in the invisible world, right? It appears magically and disappears magically. And it kind of reminds us then that the only moment that exists is the moment right then. If you see the castle, go for it. If you see the castle, be present with it. And so that sense of the invisible world, and again, the invisible world, we don't have language for, so metaphor is the language for the invisible world, and that's important. But also Parsifal's journey there, when he leaves the forest hermit, he knows that, wow, there's something I need to do. I know it's a question. And you see, this is where Linda Sussman's book, The Speech of the Grail, comes in, that he had to learn, and what needed to heal, and what did heal the Grail, wounded Grail King, is the question. So here he is searching on his horse, and it's symbolic, you know, this is all metaphor. The horse falls, he falls asleep on the horse the second time. The horse leads him. He wakes up because the horse is frightened. There's a sharp cliff up on the right, and there's a 30-foot below drop into a lake. And now the Grail King does not come in the boat this time. I'll let you read the story, but if someone else does, but they say, keep going, keep going. I love that phrase. Folks, when I did not know what I was doing, and that was a lot of the first 2 years of working with a labyrinth, I would walk the labyrinth and, what am I doing? What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. And I would hear, keep going, keep going. So if there's anybody here tonight who needs to hear that, keep going. There's actually a book on creativity called that, by the way, keep going. And that's what Parsifal heard, keep going. And so where? There's no path. Have you ever been at that moment? There's no path. And yet you keep going. And the path appears beneath your feet. So here's Parsifal, clip, clap, clip, clap, clip, clap, until finally he finds the bridge and the castle appears. And he goes into the castle, and they welcome him again with great cheer. And here he is sitting down at dinner, and there's a procession. The Grail Queen comes out carrying the Grail. Linda Sussman thinks and sees the Grail as a cornucopia, something that presents great abundance. See, abundance is associated with the imagination. The abundance is associated. It's hard to have a parched imagination. But even then, the imagination can leap out, and you can have a moment of seeing. Seeing happens in a flash. So Parsifal sits down at the dinner and the procession happens and they bring the man, the king, the Grail King, he now knows who he is, out on a stretcher again. And he finally, Parsifal turns, instead of relying on somebody else later on after dinner, right? He turns to the Grail King and says, "What ails thee, King? What ails thee?" And that's a crucial question for each of us to ask ourselves. What ails us? What ails me? Where is our blind spots? Where is the wound? Where's the wound? Because we need to have our wounds conscious. That doesn't mean they need to be healed. They can be healed even though they're broken. We can be healed even though we're broken. And so gloriously, a question from the compassion of the heart. See, our heart magnetizes what we want and need toward us. It's a magnet. The heart brings toward us what we need and want. And so this is what happens. Parsifal asks the question and the Grail King is healed. He's out of pain. And over the years, the Grail story has led to two other questions. And the one is, how can I help? The second question is, how can I help? And folks, but not help like, you help the little old lady across the street who doesn't want to go across the street. But really help. And I think that's such an important question for our culture right now. How can we dig in and not only make a difference, and it doesn't have to be a big difference. It might be a difference for one person in their life. But how can we truly help? And then the third question has mysteriousness to it. It's actually morphed. The question is, whom does the Grail serve? Whom does the Grail serve? And here's the answer. It's a cone almost. The Grail serves the servers of the Grail. Does that make sense? The Grail serves the servers of the Grail. And you see the labyrinth, again, meets you where you are, gives you what you need, and forms that invisible web between individual destiny and service to the planet. And the Grail serves us as we serve the Grail. The Grail provides the clip clap. Take a step forward, even though you don't know where you're going, even though there's no path there that has been created for you. Keep going. Clip clop, clip clop, clip clop. And that sort of summarizes the Grail legend from a kind of a drone high in the air, seeing the big picture of it all. So Menachem, I saw your comment about, in the Jewish tradition, you always ask questions. Yeah. Do you want to come in here?
Oh, I'm from the Midwest. I'm in Chicago, but Jewishly speaking, we're always questioning God, questioning ourselves, questioning everybody, and debating and arguing, with love.
Yeah, with love. Yeah. And if we could learn the with love part nowadays, right now, that would be a big step. So it's a wonderful tradition. Yeah. You coming in here, Sandra?
Yeah, I think Jean Marie and Scott had their hand up, or did they already? You already asked your question. Sorry.
Okay.
Were there any other questions from the group?
Let's see. So Alice says, I grew up thinking, questioning, just a moment here, I need to find it. Questioning anything about faith was a sin. Yeah, that's in certain brands of Christianity, you're not allowed to question, because question implies doubt, and doubt implies lack of faith. So someone's puppy is speaking up here. So those are connected. Yeah. Yeah. It's a sin because you have doubt. And if you have doubt, then you don't have a faith. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really bad advice. I think that's really bad teaching. Other thoughts, other comments here? Does anyone want to read what they wrote? Thanks so much, Jan, for putting the link to Mary Oliver's poem in there. That's great.
Well, in our group, we're all kind of working the question in our heart now is what is the best we can do with our time that we have, and what is good for ourselves or what is good for the community. And one of the ladies said that the question she's asking is, what is the best yes?
The best what? BS?
Yes, the best yes. You can say yes or no to a lot of things. But what is the best yes?
I see.
So that really struck a chord with the rest of us.
Yeah. And when you're clip-clopping on the path and not quite sure where things are going, it's probably good to say yes with discernment. But what is the best yes is a good question. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. We're in so unusual times for sure. Lee, you have your hand up. Come on in.
I do. Lauren, I was with you in 1999 at Chartres with Alan Jones, and it was a wonderful experience. And I just so appreciate the musicians you brought in from Paris to play as we walked that labyrinth. That still sits in my heart. It's so beautiful.
Wonderful.
My question now is some help with forming the question. What kind of guidance? In my writing, I had a question. I knew immediately as I was writing it was the wrong question. And I wondered what kind of guidance you give for how to formulate the question that really opens us to the Grail experience, opens us to finding that.
Yeah, and opens up to, the liminal realms, that world in between. Richard Rohr talks about the liminal realms, that's where true transformation happens. And I think that's so true. I don't know, Orly, do you have a labyrinth to walk right now with COVID?
No, I can use a finger one. And
Okay.
when I was in Portland, I would walk the Trinity Labyrinth, but I don't live in Portland right now.
Okay. I would suggest two things. Number one, if it's a poor question, here's the litmus test. If the answer is so what, it's the wrong question. That misses the mark. So what? So what? Does it matter? How long do I stay in the center? So what? But the other thing, maybe to shape the question a little bit more, so it's more like, is this your dog instead of this your dog bite? It would be to have a dialogue in a journal format. So you are, you're one person saying, say or Elise, and then have your heart answer. Right from your heart. And just have a dialogue until the question shapes itself. That may work. Yeah.
I just thought of another device that was used one time, which is just in a dialogue asking yourself what matters about this. To continue asking, to write something and what matters about that, as a way of going deeper and deeper.
That's good. Yes. Yeah, that's great. That what matters about that. Yeah. Because you don't want to go off on a chasing your own tail. Yeah. It's good. Thank you for that. Well, good. Well, we've really toward the end here, and we're going to close with a meditation. Patricia, are you going to do that? All right.
Yes, I am.
I want to say first, I've enjoyed truly being with you all tonight. So thank you so much for your attention and time being here. Yeah, thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Lauren, so much. So before I do this, I'm going to ask Jan to put in the announcements into chat. That we have four announcements. One is that the Speakers Bureau that we've been doing over the last year will continue. It's not going to continue monthly this year. We're going to cut back just a little bit, but we will have a speaker in the summer and one in the fall. so that we'll have 3 speakers. And if you all have come to this and I get you on our list, you'll get invited to them. Just to let you know that we also do a virtual walk or a handheld labyrinth walk. They're every 3rd Monday at 7. The next one is February 21st. I've been leading a short mini series on different ways of walking the labyrinth. And so we'll continue that. We have an in-person walk for those of you that live in Portland. That's the 4th Monday, and that will be the 28th, 4:30 to 7:30. And you can go on our website, which I think Heidi just put on to up there, and find out about all these events. And I also want to let you know that I'm going to be doing a workshop with Molly. At least she's next to me on my screen, with Molly Osborne. And it's called Being with Beauty. It's a labyrinth and self-reflection workshop. Because as we've also learned tonight, that beauty is wonderful, but it can be hard to get there. And so we're going to do a workshop that's going to be April 2nd, 9 a.m. to noon. It's not yet up on the website, but it will be, and you'll be hearing about it. So those are our announcements. And what we like to do is, even though we're on Zoom, we like to have a connection with each other, so that if everybody, if they feel like it, you don't have to. If you're in your pajamas, turn on your screen, and then everybody put their hands out to the side of their screen as if we were touching each other in together. And let's just take a moment to enjoy being on this journey with each and every person here, and each and every person in our lives, that we're all part of the journey. We're all struggling in our heart together. We all have the deep heart questions. Be well on the path. Enjoy. Have grace. And be well. Thank you all. It was a wonderful time being with you. And I thank Lauren so much for your wonderful teachings. And they will be recorded. They are recorded. You'll get a message as to when they're available. And thank you so much for everything.
Thank you all.